Hello and welcome to Enchantment of Eternity's review for Shadow Play, which is episode 16 of season 2 of Star Trek Deep Space Nine. This video is a part of a series of videos where I review episodes of Deep Space Nine, one episode at a time. In this video I cover the second season episode Shadow Play. So Shadow Play is the episode where Odo and Dax go to a planet in the Gamma Quadrant and they investigate missing people. They try to discover why people in this village keep disappearing. However, they soon discover that all of the people in the village are holograms and they keep disappearing because the program is malfunctioning. So Dax proposes to shut it all down so she can repair it and then reboot it. But when they go to shut it all down, this old man still remains, and he reveals that he is actually a real person, that he set up this program because his world was taken over by something called the Dominion, and so lost everything that he had, and so he created this holographic version of what he used to have, and it's all just a fantasy. And so he says to just take him back to his home world and leave the program shut down. However, Dax and Odo convince him that these people are real, they do exist, and they deserve to live. So they reinitiate the program, and they never tell anyone that the old man isn't really a hologram. Meanwhile, on the station, while Odo is away, Quark thinks this is good time for him to wreak havoc and buy some stolen goods. However, Kira is on top of it and taking over for Odo and warns Quark that he's not going to get away with anything while Odo is away. So Quark arranges for Bariel to come to the station in order to distract Kira, as the two of them fall in love and end up making out. But when Kira learns that Quark had brought Bariel on the station, she still goes out of her way to capture him and prevent him from buying the stolen goods. And then she thanks him for sending Bariel her way. Also, there's a couple of scenes where Jake Sisko is assigned to work with O'Brien as a job because it would look good on his application to Starfleet Academy. However, Jake reveals to O'Brien that he doesn't actually want to go to Starfleet Academy, but he's too afraid to tell his father that he doesn't want to be in Starfleet. But O'Brien says he'll understand, so Jake goes to his father and tells him, and his father does in fact understand and tells him whatever he does, he'll be happy as long as he does it well. So, a lot of people say that this episode has 3 plots, an A, a B, and a C. I disagree. I think it has 2 plots, an A and a B, and there is a clear A and a B. And again, I've heard other people say, oh, well, there's no really clear A plot. Yes, there is. Usually, and this isn't always the case, sometimes this turns out, in fact, in the very next episode, it will turn out not to be the case. But typically, when the title of the episode usually indicates what the A plot is, the title usually applies towards the A plot. And sometimes I'll have, funny titles meant to apply. It could have double meaning and could apply to all 3 plots, all 2 plots. Which I don't think is the case here, because Shadow Play doesn't really involve... There's nothing really in the Kira or the Jake storyline that really have to do with Shadow Play. So it's really meant to be for the Odo and Dax storyline, which I didn't take the time to actually time how much it is in the episode, but I'm pretty positive it does take up the most time in the episode. It's clearly the focus in the episode, and it's the best storyline of the episode. Now, the B plot is the Kira and Bareil stuff, and the Jake stuff, I don't actually call that a plot. It's not really a C plot. It's just there's a couple scenes. It's kind of like the episode A Man Alone, which has all these different scenes involving all these different plots, if you call them. They're not really plots. It's just slice of life on the station. Like you get scenes with with Cisco and Dax sort of reuniting and telling how weird it is that now Dax is in Jadzia, and you get a couple scenes with Keiko and Miles fighting, and Keiko's unhappy in the station. You get a couple of scenes with Jake and Nog being friends, but the main plot is Odo being accused of murder and being chased down by a Simpsons mob. So it's not really an A, B, C, D, and E plot. There's just Odo's the A plot, and the other stuff is just some scenes that are slice of life in the station. Same thing here with the Jake stuff. That is clearly not a plot. It's clearly just some scenes in the slice of life in the station. The Kira's, because it has no story. There's no arc. There's no through story. I mean, I suppose you could try to make an arc out of it and saying, well, at first Cisco thinks his son's going to be in Starfleet, and then he learns his son isn't going to be in Starfleet. But that's not an arc. That's just finding out one thing to another. The Kira thing, that's an arc, because it does go through Quark not being able to do the crime he wants to do because Kira's on his back, so he tries to divert her, and Kira's falling in love with Bariel, but then she learns that. See, that is an arc. Yeah. So that's clearly the B plot, because they do spend a lot more time on Odo and Jadzia, which is where the heart of the story clearly lies. So, I am going to start with the A plot, with Jadzia and Odo. Now, I thought they were a unique pairing. I was like, this is a pairing you don't see that much. But then I remembered we actually did see this pairing just a couple episodes ago with the alternate. In fact, I remember when this episode first came out, I was like, oh, so another episode where Jadzia and Odo goes to the wormhole to a planet in the Gamma Quadrant. However, this is different because I feel like this is just Jadzia and Odo, where the alternate, he had more pull. And most of the time was spent talking to him, and Jadzia interacting with him, or Odo interacting with him. So it's actually very different, I think, because this is the first time we get to see them two alone and see how they interact with each other. And that was a really interesting aspect of the story, of the episode to me, because especially at the start of the episode, where Jadzia is talking about love and romance and basically just telling a bunch of gossip, and Odo's totally not into it, which totally fits with this character. But then Odo thinks that it's impossible for someone to be in love with him or to have a crush on him. And then Jadzia says, well, I wouldn't be so quick to judge that, because love usually pops up where you least expect it. And then the episode proceeds to have a love pop up for Odo that he least expected it. Now, it's not a romantic love. It's more of a sort of parental friendship type love. But she didn't specify. And she was talking about romantic love in that case, but it applies to she said love in general, so it kind of applies to love in general, and Odo did form a good relationship with the young girl, and did, in fact, show her love and appreciation, and it was a kind of friendship that goes beyond probably any friendship that Odo had prior, and he sort of was open to that, and it come up in a situation that he least expected it. And it's funny because we just got the episode Next Generation, because again, this is I find it very interesting watching them in order of when they first aired, rather than doing all TNG then doing all DS9. I actually like this. This is finding it much more interesting, because you see how these episodes originally aired together. And it wasn't that just a couple episodes ago when TNG was Nine Noon Self, where we got a really good episode with Data forming a friendship with a young girl. And in this episode, Odo forms a friendship with a young girl, and both are done really well. And they're very unique and they're different. It's not the same thing and the same beats at all. The Odo is a totally different character in Data. The situation is completely different. This is an investigation of missing people. The unknown self was Data having amnesia and stumbling into a pre-warp village and not knowing who he was. The young girl in the unknown self had a mother who died years ago and was looking after looked after by her father. Well, in this case, the young girl, her mother's missing, and they don't know where she is, and she's being looked after by her grandfather. So it's different. Like, there's definitely some similarities, but it's different enough not to be like a repeat of it. But it is. I do find it interesting that these two came out very similar to each other. Now, as I said, I like the sort of friendship, the back and forth between Dax and Odo. It was a really interesting pairing, and it's interesting meeting these people. I think the way they're introduced are very interesting. You get the sort of cop who is very sort of not your typical cop. He's kind of eccentric, and it's kind of a peaceful village, so they're not really used to crimes like this, and they don't really know how to handle themselves. So then Odo comes in, and then once Odo meets Taya, the relationship there is really, really good. I love how it starts out where she's a little bit afraid of him, and he comforts her and tries to reassure her he'll do everything he can to find her mother. And eventually he just, like, the friendship, the bond grows from there and forms very naturally. Like, it's very good writing, in my opinion, because you really do buy it and you really are sort of invested in it. And the moment where they find out that the holograms, where they get to the edge of the village and she reaches her hand and it disappears and Odo freaks the hell out, you can tell how much he cares about her. And then the ending where Odo delivers on this promise and brings her mother back to her, and how thankful she is but sad that he's leaving, is really touching. It is a really, really touching thing. Now, there's the changeling element to this, and I did hint at this when I was talking about the alternate, because this, I believe, is the second episode the name changeling is mentioned. The first time was in season 1 with Vortex, so another species from a Gamma Quadrant, and they talked about, eventually, when he revealed the truth, he said that there were just legends of shapeshifters they called changelings existing years and years, like centuries ago, and that they've been persecuted. And in this episode, they pretty much said the same thing. The young girl, when Odo says that he can change his shape, she's like, "Oh, you mean you're a changeling?" And he's like, "Well, yeah, I guess so." And she's like, "No, that's not true. Changelings aren't real. They're imaginary. They're make-believe." And so, and you realize that they're interwoven to this race's mythology as well, because she talks about stories where they're obviously child stories where there's an evil changeling who's like mean and someone tricks him into turning into bread, so they gobble him up or whatever. And so that is interesting that we're getting into that kind of mythology. And what's also interesting is this is the second time the name changeling was mentioned in the show. It's also the third time that the Dominion is mentioned, and it's the first time that the changelings and the Dominion is mentioned in the same episode. Now, that could be a coincidence. I tend to believe that at this point in stage, they did not know that the changelings would be a part of the Dominion. I don't believe they came up with that idea until in between seasons 2 and 3, but I could be wrong, but I'm pretty sure that's the case. So I do think it is kind of a coincidence, but they're both kind of examples of the writers building this mythology in the Gamma Quadrant. One with the changelings and one with the Dominion. And yes, so this is the third and final time the Dominion is mentioned before we actually get to see them in the season 2 finale. The first time was in Rules of Acquisition. The second time was in Sanctuary, and this will be the third time, where the what's his face old guy, Grandpa, who's actually real, says that his world was taken over by the Dominion and things weren't the same. So you get the sense that the Dominion conquered them. And him saying things aren't the same, meaning like that their people still existed, they still lived, but they were kind of, their whole society changed and most likely were oppressed. At least I think that's what's implied. And so that's why he left. And it's funny because from memory I thought that his people were like killed by the Dominion. There was only a few of them left, but I think my memory was getting confused with the Guinan and the Borg and that. So that actually wasn't the case. They didn't wipe out his race. They just conquered them. But yeah, that does kind of... And it seems like they did... what's implied is that they didn't come with warships and like invaded and it's like we're taking over. It seems to be more of kind of a diplomatic sort of thing, and as we see, and I think this is setting up the Dominion. I think they had some loose plan of what the Dominion might be like their general idea is that they would be the anti-Federation, so it would kind of be like a world joining the Federation but being done from a more hostile perspective rather than the Federation enticing a world and it would be their choice to join the Federation. This anti-Federation would force them to do it and it wouldn't actually benefit them the way it would benefit joining the Federation. So kind of an anti-Federation. So I think that's what the general idea was. But in either case, I love this world building. This is a good thing about the Dominion, is that they didn't just pop up out of nowhere. They were planting the seeds throughout season 2. I think it was quite clever. But regardless, yeah, I think the storyline of the old man being like recreating these people and thinking they're make-believe, but then Odo, someone who often is seen, feels like an outsider and feels like he doesn't belong. He's the one that mostly feels like he needs to stick up for these holograms, how one do you pronounce it? We're all holograms? Anyway, that he feels the need to stick up for them and be like, no, they're real. It's kind of, it has sort of precursor to what they do with the Doctor over in Voyager, where I had that feel. It reminded me of that, the whole holographic rates things, but they didn't go into that much detail. Now, if you were to say where this got its inspiration from episodes that came before this, you could bring up Measure of a Man. But rather than being like a trial or whatever, is more of Odo and Jadzia like pleading with this guy that what he experiences is real. And I love how they convince them too. They're like, well, when she was sad, you were comforting her and trying to make her feel better. Why was that if she's just a hologram? And he like breaks down, is like, because I love her. Like, that was powerful. Like, this is good acting. I think this is a really good storyline. If I haven't been very clear on this, I'm a huge fan of it. I think it's a great character story for Odo. It's a great pairing with Odo and Jadzia. It's a great pairing with Odo and Taya. And by the way, speaking of Taya, I gotta mention that the actress who plays her, amazing job. She is, of course, is the same child actress who was over in Imaginary Friend on TNG, and when I reviewed that episode, I did mention what a great actress she was there. Noli Thornton was her name, and how Star Trek in general usually doesn't do a really good job casting child actors. They've had bad luck, or a lot of bad child actors, some really, really bad cases, such as the episode Rascals. So it is rare and it's hard to find good child actors, and so it makes sense to me if they did find such a good one with Imaginary Friend, that they would bring her back. If not the same character, at least the same actor. And it was, when they had the script and they needed a child actor, I'm sure they thought, let's get this one. She did an amazing job last time, and she does an even better job this time, in my opinion. Now, I was curious what Noli Thornton got up to, because I've heard that she stopped acting in the late 90s, and I really wanted to know why, because she was such a good actor. But I couldn't really find any information. I think that she's, unless I'm just suck at finding the information, I get the impression she's kind of private and doesn't really want to divulge too much of her private life, which is fair enough. But I did find out that she directed a short film sometime in the 2000s, I think 2008 or something like that, 2005, something like that. And she was a location manager in a couple other short films right before she directed one. But after that, she doesn't have any more credits on IMDb. Apparently, now I can put up a picture of what she looks like now, which is, I thought was interesting, because this was done on a sort of live stream for Beverly Hills 90210, which I'm not a fan of. But apparently she was a recurring guest character on that show. And she was most known for that show. She also starred in a straight to Disney Channel movie, TV movie. I think it was called Heidi or something like that. And apparently she was a regular cast member on the Martin Short show. If you say you'd never heard of it, neither have I. I have some vague memory of it, but I think it's one of those shows that only lasted one season. But apparently she won some sort of award for that show. But anyway, she was most known for 90210, and so she did a live stream relatively recently, past couple years. But I was watching the live stream, and all she did was talk about 90210, so I don't really know what's up with her personal life. I did find out that she has a kid, who I believe is 8 years old at this stage. But not that I'm like stalking her or anything. I was just curious as to what happened, why she stopped acting, because she's obviously really good at it. But I guess I could just guess that lifestyle just wasn't for her. I hope it wasn't that Hollywood blocked her out, because that would be a big load of bullshit if that was the case, because she's an amazing actor. But anyway, enough about her. Let's get into the B plot. This one's, I don't know. It's fine. I'm not, okay, so the thing with Quark, this is like your typical Quark B plot. He's trying to sell stolen goods from his cousin, but Kira keeps interrupting him because he thinks he can get away with it because Odo's away, but Kira's like, I'm keeping an eye on you. Like, I got nothing wrong with that. That's fine. It's kind of typical, so I'm not crazy about it, but it's fine. The Bariel thing, Quark brings Bariel on to make Kira distracted. That's fine too. Like, I love that line at the end where she thanks him for bringing Bariel on board and says he was very diverting. that was a good line. And then Quark being like, not diverting enough. That was great. Because she was taunting him because she knew exactly why, but it didn't work. But I will say, Kira and Bareil have no chemistry in this episode, which is a shame because they actually did have chemistry in the circle. Like, I think they did a really good job building up this relationship, and I wanted to see them together, and it was obvious that they were hinting at that they would be together. In both the circle and the siege, they had a lot of chemistry. You could feel the chemistry. And then this episode is the episode where they actually hook up, where they actually get together, and there's no chemistry. And they seem to just hook up out of nowhere, like the shit about playing spring ball, or Kira not agreeing with his sermons or whatever. Like, it just didn't pass as real. It didn't seem realistic. It didn't seem natural. And worst of all was the kiss talking scene. This is probably the scene I've heard people criticize the most, and I can definitely see why. It seems very Hollywoodish, like a very sitcom-esque cliche where they're kissing and talking at the same time, and that's when Kira finds out that Quark arranged to send Bariel aboard, and she realizes it's because he's trying to distract her. But I just, like, the kiss talking is not something that, I don't know. It just, and it seems so awkward the way the actors were doing. You can tell, it's just, it seems like the actors didn't believe it, because they just had no chemistry. So the storyline was fine. Like, I don't think it sucks, because it's interesting enough as, it has a B plot, which is what it is. Just some funny Quark shit while Odo's away. It works for that, but this was a bad way to bring Bariel and Kira together, because I've heard other people say that the Kira and Bariel had no chemistry whatsoever. I disagree. I think they have tons of chemistry, just not in this episode, and this is the episode that brings them together, which is a fucking shame, quite frankly. So, let's talk about the other slice of life scenes. Not a C plot. Slice of life scenes that we get in this. Some people might think I'm splitting hairs, but I think it's important. But anyway, the slice of life scenes with Jake. Again, there's nothing really to say about it because it's not an actual storyline. It's just a few scenes where Jake says, I don't want to be in Starfleet, and O'Brien's like, oh, your dad will be okay with it. And then he tells his dad, and he's okay with it. Pretty straightforward. But it is kind of touching, heartwarming that Benjamin had that reaction, and shows what a good father is, and I think that's what's important. They wanted to portray a really good father and son relationship, not so pristine that it was unrealistic, so it has to be a little bumpy, and I think they succeeded. It's a relationship that's realistic but heartwarming, and you can tell that they have a strong love for each other. But the thing I really want to talk about with this is how this decision, oh God, I'm trying to look up the writer's name. I had it on the tip of my tongue. Something Wolf. Was it Robert Hewitt Wolf? Hold on, let's see if I can... Yeah, Robert Hewitt Wolf, I'm right. So he wrote this episode, and I've heard him in interviews talk about how the idea for Jake not joining Starfleet was kind of based off his own life, because he came from a military family, and he decided not to join the military, and he had to tell his father, and his father was kind of upset at first, but then was very understanding. And so Robert Hewitt Wolf obviously decided to become a writer, which is the same direction they'll take Jake in. So Jake is kind of modeled off of his own experience, how his family was in Starfleet, but instead of joining Starfleet, he decided to become a writer. Here's the problem. That sounds all well and good, and that is being more unique rather than, there's a kid you typically think he's going to want to join Starfleet, like Wesley or whatever. It's like the typical thing. And so they sort of subverted expectations and the writer based it off of his own personal experience. So all that sounds all well and good on the page. Here's the problem. This decision unilaterally will make Jake Sisko irrelevant to the rest of the show. It makes other side characters like Garrick, Rom, Nog, Goldukat. I'm trying to think there's other side characters. Yeah, that's all I can think of at the moment. I'm sure there's more. Side characters like that become more prominent than Jake. In other words, by the end of the series, they're more like main characters, and Jake is more like a supporting character, even though Cyril Lofton is still officially on the main cast, and Andrew Robinson and what's-his-face, who plays Rom, and the other guy who plays Nog. Well, I'm sorry, I'm just blanking on their names at the moment. They remain supporting characters. Well, honestly, they appear almost in just as many episodes as Jake, and when they do appear, they're a lot more prominent and get a lot more screen time. And the reason why is because there's really no room for the captain's son, who's a writer, in this type of story that they want to tell in Deep Space Nine. Nog in particular, he does join Starfleet, and so that's why he becomes more important. He becomes an ensign on the bridge of the Defiant, and an engineer, and he's in the war situations. He's involved in this. He's dealing with Martok, and a lot of times, especially in the season 6 and 7, Jake is only there as Nog's friend. He's only there as a supporting character in Nog's storyline, because Nog was the character they decided to join Starfleet and Jake wasn't. So it kind of ruined him to be in obscurity. And the problem is, because he's a main cast member, they try several times really hard to make him a more prominent in the show, and usually they fail miserably, and they come up with some terrible episodes because they can't exactly figure out how to make a writer a main character on a show about Starfleet. And so they at one towards the end, of season 6, they morph him into a journalist, which he never was. He was a fiction writer. He was a novelist. But all of a sudden, he kind of morphs into a journalist, which is not what he was. But that way they could make him more relevant. But even then, he's still not as relevant as the Starfleet characters, or even characters like Garrick, who isn't even in Starfleet, but he contributes to the main plot more. And yeah, there's some episodes, like the worst example of them trying to do something with Jake and it falling apart is The Muse. Absolutely terrible. They try to make up an alien creature inspiring him to write because they don't know what to do with a fucking character who's a writer. And then, even when they turn him into a journalist, they don't really have that much to do with him. And then they have an episode like The Valiant, where he and Nog get trapped on this Starfleet ship run by cadets who are all crazy and incompetent. And they still don't utilize, they could have done more with him, but they still didn't do jack shit with him other than him talking about his dad. So, as all well and good this idea seems at the time, it's like, oh, we're going to buff conventional thinking. We're going to subvert expectations. We're going to base it off of my life when I didn't join the military. Yeah, that's all well and good in principle, but this is the main cast member, and by making him not join Starfleet, you just ruined him, unfortunately, and sentenced him to obscurity, and I think it was a huge mistake. I think that Jake should have been our main cadet character, not fucking Nog. And I'm upset that they did this. Now, Nog is a story for another time, which I'll get into most likely in Season 3 when he decides to join Starfleet. I think, but the short answer of Nog is I think that they just completely rewrote the character. And it was people trying to argue, oh, people grow up and it's natural development. It is not. There's a difference between natural development, character growth from an adolescent to an adult, and taking one character and completely rewriting and changing it so he's a completely different character. Case of Nog is the second example, not the first. But, as I said, that's a story for another time. So, I would now like to thank my Patreon supporters for supporting me on Patreon. It's very much appreciated. This helped me continue with the channel, help me grow, help me strive, help me become a better person. Alright, I don't mean to exaggerate, but now I do appreciate everyone's support on Patreon, particularly that of Brandon Neal Howes, Antarius, and Jordan Johnson. Thank you very, very much for your very strong support. I would also like to give a shout out to Benjamin Mead, Greg Marley, Francisco Chuck Hooks, Kyrie091, Anthony D. Benedictus, Ricky, Matty Jester, Joel Lavals, Alessandro Miguelesio, Norwood Buchwald, Stephen Kennedy, Britton Berg, and Allison Fordyce. Thank you so very, very much for your support. So, we do have a few patron comments on this episode. First comment is from Kyrie091, who says, Shadow play, more like Shadow Nay. Oh, I remember this one. I remember actually kind of liking the mystery about the disappearing people on the planet in the Gamma Quadrant. Now, if only we could get Vic Fontaine to disappear. No, but seriously, Pally, I'll be here all week. Yeah, no, I do wish that Vic Fontaine's program would malfunction and they decide never to reactivate him. So we're on the same page with that one. Anyway, but I do like Shadow Nay. That is a good one, we'll say. Anyway, next comment is from Stephen Kennedy, who says, so, you have an episode for me? Yes, sir, I do. It's called Shadow Play. So, what happens in this thing? Well, Odo and Dax go to a planet where everyone is a hologram, except for one very old man. Odo befriends a small girl who lost her mother, and she'll be played by Noli Thornton. Hey, she's from that other show. Yes, sir, The Next Generation. I don't buy that show's name, as it's really not The Next Generation. It's almost 80 years between TOS, so it should be called The Next Generation. Sir, it was called that because it was the next show after the original one. Sir, are you okay? It looks like you're thinking. Sorry, what? I was just thinking we should have added 4 next instead of just 1. So what happens next? When they realize that they're all holograms, they must find it difficult to live with the fact that they're all holograms. Actually, it'll be super easy, barely an inconvenience. Oh, really? Yeah, no, they're just fine with it. They just accept it right away. They don't seem to mind. Well, I think that if you found out your entire life was just a program in a computer, that would change everything. Your entire existence would be shown to be a fraud. This would certainly create upheaval in this society, and there'd be absolute chaos. Sir, I'm going to need you to get all the way off my back about them being holograms. They're just fine with it. They don't care. Well, let me get off that thing. So what happens on the station while Odo was away? Did that lovable rascal Quark get up to some scheming? You know it, sir. Quark tried to buy some stolen merchandise from his cousin who robbed the Cardassian Museum, but Kira stopped him and told him that just because Odo's away doesn't mean that he can get away with anything. So Quark gets Bariel to come to the station to distract her, and he becomes her new boyfriend. Oh, wow. It's a good thing her new boyfriend wasn't Julian Bashir. No, but Julian will turn him into an artificial robot in Season 3. Also, Jake's gonna tell his dad that he doesn't want to join Starfleet. So is Cisco gonna toss him out the nearest airlock? No, he understands his decision and says, I'll back you all the way, whatever you choose. Ooh, understanding your son's decision not to follow in your footsteps is tight. I have an idea for something else. How about we do this episode again in about 8 years in another Star Trek show that's a prequel, and we get the same actor who plays Odo to star in that episode. Hey, he's from the show that we're talking about now! So, in 8 years, in some other Star Trek show, we're going to do the same plot, Shadowfax? No, sir, Shadowplay. Shadowfax is Gandalf's horse. Won't Star Trek fans notice that we're just doing the exact same plot over again? Nah, Star Trek fans never notice stuff like that. So my rating is 7. I would have liked to seen a scene with Bashir trying to spy on Quark while he is scheming, out of 10. No, that's a good point. Like, they had this thing with Kira going to Bashir towards the beginning of the episode, said, oh, I want you to spy on Quark. He's like, oh, I'd be happy to. I want to try out these things and techniques that Garrick is treating me. And then they never show him again for the rest of the episode. I'm like, I wanted to see that. But anyway, so... Stephen, if just for those watching, Stephen Kennedy did write out the script for the pitch meeting format, and so when I saw it, I was like, well, if I'm going to do a pitch meeting, I might as well do it, and so decided to go full tilt with it, and I did tweak the script a little bit. I hope you're okay with that, Stephen. I added a little bit more things to make it more pitch meeting-esque, and I needed to throw in something about getting all the way off my back because I love that. So I hope you're okay. I did tweak the script a little bit, but the majority is what Stephen Kennedy wrote. Anyway, thank you so much for that. That was fun. Hello, editing Mark here. Just interjecting because I forgot to point out something very important. That skit was, of course, a take off of Ryan George's pitch meetings. It is not at all meant to be presented as my original work because the whole format and a lot of the sayings like super easy, barely an inconvenience, and oh, doing this is tight, are stuff taken directly from Ryan George's pitch meetings. So it's meant to be homage to that since I love it so much, and I do recommend anyone who hasn't to check it out. It's on YouTube, the pitch meetings channel, and it has all the skits where Ryan George does movies and pitches movies. Has never done Star Trek episodes, therefore I wanted to do that same format for a Star Trek episode. And of course, Stephen Kennedy, who wrote the script, knew what he was referencing that as well. So yeah, I just want to make sure that I give a shout out to Ryan George pitch meeting. Definitely check that out if you haven't yet. Anyway, next comment is from Antarius, who says, like in the last episode, the reason why these two characters travel to the Gamma Quadrant is rather weak. Since I didn't remember why the colonists were disappearing, I found the mystery pretty exciting, and I loved how Odo and the young girl bonded. In this episode, Odo explains that he is not good in imitating faces. This seems implausible since he can otherwise replicate all other objects quite perfectly. After the way Wesley was portrayed, it was certainly a good decision to show that Jake's path will not take him to Starfleet Academy, and it was great how Cisco was supportive of him. The plot about Kira and Bareil, however, was much weaker and forced. My rating is a 7 out of 10. Well, we'll have to agree to disagree about Jake. I do agree that it works in this episode, but that's the problem. It doesn't work for the rest of the show, though. Anyway, next comment is from Norman Buckwald, who says, when it comes to episodes with twists, whether I see the twist before or not, I have to at least, on later viewings, how well it worked. No, sorry, I had to see at least on later viewings how well it worked. What did it introduce and provide more of the characters? Of course, and also in the context of the whole series, how well this episode stands out. I can at least say with absolute certainty and with no ghosts involved, I like this episode better in Deep Space Nine than in Enterprise. Even though, yes, I know a key actor was in both of them, granted in one of them as an investigator and the other as the one responsible. My joke for the latter is where T'Pol removes the mask and says, "It's Odo," and he says, "Yes, I would have gotten away with it too if it wasn't for you meddling Starfleet." Pairing him up with Dax is puzzling, but at least I'll give the creator some merit for having the two main characters be actual aliens and not humans. I guess at this point, Rick Berman and or certain bigwigs didn't make a big deal of that as I could see happening. As for this episode, it's just okay. I keep forgetting this is the one where Jake says he doesn't want to be in Starfleet, which I guess is important for an interesting twist/development. It's too bad that the writing staff couldn't figure out effectively what to do with Jake's character for the rest of the series. That's what I'm saying. So, in a way, he suffers, including the irony that he was more interesting being the fiction writer than the hack journalist he later becomes. As for Odo and learning more about him, the status of changeling in hindsight, sorry, but I have to say meh. Anyway, I will give this episode 6 holographic revelations out of 10. Yeah, one thing I forgot to mention is at the start of the episode, the reason why Odo is in the Gamma Quadrant with Jadzia is so weak. It is so contrived. Jadzia is like, oh, Benjamin sent me to the Gamma Quadrant to study these anomalous readings of Almacron data. And Odo's just here to look for his origins. What? Does Odo just randomly go to the Gamma Quadrant to look for his origins? Like, that makes no sense. Answer is they wanted to put Jadzia and Odo together as main characters, and so they didn't even try to come up with an interesting reason. But, I am willing to just go with it too, because I think it's a very interesting pairing. Now, of course, I agree with you wholeheartedly on the part of the writers didn't know what to do with Jake. Once they decided he didn't want to be in Starfleet, they couldn't figure out what to do with him. Which is a shame. It is a shame, but it's a reality. I mean, that is what happened. Now, as for Oasis, yeah, that episode sucks. I'm sorry, it was just a rip-off of this one. And being like, ooh, there's ghosts, ooh. It was cheesy, stupid, suffered from Enterprise Season 1 itis, and nowhere near as good as this. But I saw the opinion once of someone saying, oh, the Enterprise episode of Oasis is way better than this one. Get the fuck out of here with that. Not even close. Not even close. Anyway, next comment is from Brandon Neal House, who says, the only shadow play you need is the Joy Division song from Unknown Pleasures. Odo and Dax visiting the planet of the vanishing holograms doesn't hold my interest. Maybe the holograms keep disappearing because they're embarrassed by the silliest looking clothes in a Star Trek episode since Violation. Hold on, I'm going to pause Brandon's comment because I need to address that, because they're wearing bathrobes. They're wearing bathrobes. They're all wearing they're bulky, puffy bathrobes. And on top of that, they got puffy hats with beads coming down. Everyone has beads coming out of their head. Why do they have beads coming out of their heads and wearing bathrobes? No, this is the worst. The worst costuming that I've seen in the Star Trek episode. 100% agree. Anyway, get back to Brandon's comment. How are holographic people able to have a child? The only child in the village at that, who was played very well by the kid who appeared as Clara Sutter in TNG episode Imaginary Friend, when Rulergen, who reminds me of the grouchy old geezer from Progress, finally dies. Will the holograms suffer mass trauma? Alright, I gotta pause and answer this too. The holograms were programmed to have kids because they're programmed to act like real people, and so the pregnancies just happen holographically. Like, it's just what it's programmed to do. And she wasn't the only kid. There were tons of kids. If you can, in particular, there was one scene where she was hanging out with two other kids, and Odo comes up, and the other kids run away from him. So there were other kids. And I didn't think Rulergen was definitely not as grumpy as that fucking geezer from Progress. But he was kind of gruff. But I don't think the holograms don't suffer mass trauma when he dies, because they don't even know he's a real person. I wonder if they'll even find out. Because it seems like the hologram bodies were programmed to decay and act like real bodies, which is why they never noticed before. So I assume they wouldn't notice the difference from the real body decaying and a different body decaying. So I assume Dax said she fixed the program so it'll last forever. So I assume the goal is to just keep it running long after his death, even when there's no real flesh and blood person there, because they're real people in their own rights. That's kind of implied. Like, they don't really hammer you over the head with it the way that Voyager does, but it's kind of implied in this episode. I suppose that they could always put them in one of those boxes that Moriarty was in eventually once the dude dies, but yeah, I don't know. Just leave it and let it be. Anyway, sorry, back to the comment. Odo is quite rightly bored by Dax's gossip, and Dax is meant to be a strong female character. Ha! Quark invited Kira's hunky priest onto the station. Almost works, but we never see Quark's cousin. Antos Bariel and Kira playing spring ball, just the two of them making out and talking at the same time, which brings disturbing images of fascination into my mind. Oh god, you just made me cringe just by mentioning that damn episode. Anyway, why does Bashir need to spy on Quark? Something else we never see. Odo's got a bunch of deputies, has he not? Good question. And Jake doesn't want to join Starfleet. Frankly, I don't blame him. If there's no conflict, there's not much to be invested in. 4 mentions of the Dominion out of 10. Alright, so thank you, patrons, so much for your comments. So my rating for Shadowplay out of 10 is going to be an 8. Extremely good. So I see I am way higher than my patrons this week, which is all good. Well, not way higher. A couple patrons gave it 7, but then a couple gave it like 4 or 3. So I'm much higher than that. But no, I really like this episode. I love the Odo stuff and the Dax stuff. I think the revelation that there were holograms, I think, was very effective. Not as shocking as the Whispers reveal, but that was the creme of the creme. That was the best sort of shocking ending that Deep Space Nine had. So of course, not everything's going to be as great as that. But it worked well enough. Like, I didn't see it coming. I thought it was a really good revelation. But most of all, what I think makes this episode work is the relationship between Odo and Taya. And as I said, the actress who plays her is magnificent. Really good for a child actor. And their chemistry was well written. And I think it was a really heartwarming story that I love. In fact, I probably would have given this episode a 9 if it wasn't for the Bariel stuff. Like, as I said, the Quark, that's fine, that's whatever. I'm scheming. That's fine. That's what he's there for. But the Bariel and Kira, like, they had a lot of chemistry in the other episodes, but not this one. This one, they just ruined them. And it's really could feel that the actors were not feeling it. And it's just, it's not good. So, I did have to bring it down a notch for that. And the Jake stuff, as I said, that's fine. For this episode, they ruined his character going forward, but that's going forward. This episode, it's heartwarming. It's a good scene. Benjamin's a great father, so it gives you a nice feeling. So, really good episode. I would give it a 9 if it wasn't for the Bariel stuff sucking, but it still gets an 8. So I'm still much stronger on this episode than any of my patrons and most people, I gather. But I think this is a really good episode. I do think this is a really good episode of Season 2. Mainly because of Taya. She's just a really good actor. Really good chemistry with Odo. I loved it. So that is it for my review of Shadowplay. If you enjoyed this video, please be sure to leave a like, subscribe, leave a comment. How much am I liking this episode too much? Am I totally wrong about Jake? Did that kiss talking annoy you just as much as it annoyed me? Let me know in the comments. And if you really, really liked this video, if you really enjoyed it, you could consider supporting me on Patreon. Helps me out with what I do. And there'll be a link in the description below. There's different tiers for different budgets, different rewards. I have a patron-only series that I do where I revisit my reviews just for Patreon supporters, and other perks such as pre-releases, request a video for me to do, stuff like that. You can check out if you're so inclined. Alright, so let's see what's coming up next on the old channel here. Where am I? Shadowplay. So Wednesday will be my review for Eye of the Beholder. Thursday will be my overall Season 5 review for Star Trek Lower Decks. Saturday, I'll be counting down my top 10 favorite shows of 2024, something I do at the end of every year. And then on Monday will be my ranking all of the movies that I saw this year. It's not 10s, it won't be a top 10, but I'll just be talking about the movies I saw in 2024. So that's what's coming up on my channel. Be sure to check it out as I continue to cover Star Trek Deep Space Nine and Star Trek Next Generation, one episode at a time. So be sure to subscribe so you can keep up with all of that. And thanks a lot for watching.